All right, brothers and sisters. Like I said, I have a special treat for you. I got my boy here from where you from, Michigan?
Yeah, Roseville, Michigan.
Roseville, Michigan. All right, we got my boy Josh here. So, Josh, for the carriers who may not know you yet, who are you? Where do you carry? And how long have you been with the Postal Service?
So I got hired in. My name is Joshua Shrub. I'm the Roseville Wrecking Ball. I got a podcast. I got hired in December of 21. I just say, because it was Christmas Eve was my first day. I just say 22 because, I can't really take credit for a week to say I got hired in 21. But yeah, I, I am a city carrier and a chief steward out of Roseville, Michigan. And I've been there since 22, so what, 4 years or so. I was a steward as a CCA. As soon as I hit my 90 days, I jumped in because they said, "Hey, wait a second." It would have been before 90 days, but they said they can fire you for anything, so you don't want to let them know your steward material first before you pass your 90 days. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. That answers. What made you decide to become a union steward?
Well, I was a steward for 10 years at my last job, and basically what originally got me into it is, I like contract language. I used to write contract language when I was in a band. Not that it meant too much, but I got into it when I was in my teens. Obviously it didn't make me any money, but I also liked labor rights. I have family that was in unions like the UAW, and one of my grandpa's brothers used to be a UAW president, and my grandpa was involved. And I just started standing up for my rights inside the workroom place, and I ended up doing it for my fellow coworkers as well. And obviously, my time period as a 10-year steward at my last job, as soon as I got hired at the post office, I asked my carrier and my academy instructor, I said, "Hey, which branch am I in?" And she told me where it was and which one it was. And I actually visited the branch before I visited the station to ask them if they had a steward position available. Uh, and of course, I got lucky they did. Um, there's two guys that used to do it, but they were kind of out of it at the time. So lucky for me, I was able to go right in because I knew there's a chance I would have had to wait because if there's guys doing the job right, can't really do nothing. But I got lucky. I jumped right into it.
Wow. Well, that's cool. What was the moment you realized, okay, carriers really need representation here? Or was it just the fact that you just started being a steward as soon as you walked in the door?
Well, I started being a steward as soon as I walked into the door, but I got to know a lot of carrier concerns as time went on, especially as a CCA. Those concerns are a little bit more exhausted because it's 10 times as much mandation and all these other things. So you really do understand what letter carriers need when you're a CCA, of course, on the workroom floor.
All right. Well, you're also a podcaster.
I'm gonna sip my
What
coffee.
pushed you? What pushed you to start speaking out publicly instead of just handling issues behind the scenes?
I think we touched on this on one of your prior episodes. There was a steward, East Point, Terry Furton. He's one of the best stewards we got in this branch. And branch 4374, by the way, if I haven't said that yet. And he's kind of like our East Point's our sister city. It's probably the city that we feel closest to because it borders us and similar size. They're a little bit smaller, but they're kind of East Point and Roseville, kind of the same city, to be honest. And he told me, hey, one day he said, hey, he's a postal podcast listener. He that's all he does. He said, "Hey, the way you educate, I think you could provide some value if you started a podcast. Can you do that?" And I said, "Well, I don't have money, I don't have the ability to buy the equipment." But he said, "Well, I'll buy you the microphone." And he ordered the microphone, and here I am now. I'm obligated. So, yeah, of course, I had to start the podcast, and it's been fun. It's gotten positive reception, and the more people reinforce that they can use it, then of course I decided I wanted to do as much as I could.
Well, you do an amazing job, brother. I really enjoy your podcast. I really do. As soon
Oh,
as it
thanks.
comes out, I listen to it right away. Um, how would you describe the current atmosphere on the workroom floor?
Currently, we're stuck in a very strange position. I think that the Postal Service, for a very long time, has had the benefit of not being accountable for their mismanaging. And back in the day when volumes were high, mismanagement was sustainable. Like, they make many dumb choices, and the only consequence they got was if they were to report negative 9 billion, the only consequence of that would be a positive one on the end of bargaining, because then they can pull their pockets out inside out when they go to bargain with us. But other than that, they've never held they've never been held accountable for it. So they're kind of stuck in this position where we like to make bad choices. We like to paying people twice. Like, for example, oh, well, I don't want people over 10 hours, so I'm going to violate the contract because I want my bonus. Well, now this guy gets his bonus, and then these carriers get their contract money, the violation money. So you give him twice the money for the same thing when you could have just let the guy go over into penalty status. And so they've had this long history where now they're finally going to be held accountable for it, and it's the letter carrier that's going to pay for it at the end in the form of our contract. And I think that it's just escalated to the point where they're trying to make our public image bad at twofold at our expense, because not only do they get the benefit of the instant gratification of saving money, but also in the long run, the public won't have the back of the city letter carrier. So it's a hostile work environment with a lot of bad choices, not a lot of sense, and we're just heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Wow. That was a good answer. What are the most common contract violations you see happening right now?
Well, I think this question is it's very specific to each installation. I think it depends on what type of bad choices your guys are doing, and how far your grievances have gotten you. Because, for example, back in the day, if you were to ask me this in 2023, I'd say improper mandation. They were mandating 5 times a week. 5 days out of the 6 we deliver, they basically had a violation every day. And then I filed the grievances. I got about $30,000. I escalated the remedies, and then at one point they said, you know what, it's not worth it. And now you're lucky to see it once a month. So I think it all depends. Obviously Article 8 is always going to be an issue. 17 is going to be an issue because they don't like to give stewards their time. It depends on your station, really. And then limitations, and they like to change the workroom rules. Article 5, they like to do all kinds of funny stuff. And mutual respect, of course.
Mutual respect's becoming very high. It's always been an issue, but I'm starting to feel that mutual respect. I'm starting to feel that the supervisors are feeling more pressure than the carrier is.
Yeah,
They
and
are.
and that's worse for the carrier, because if the supervisor is getting, the top down upset at them, and those guys in those phone calls, they say that shit. They say, the carrier's a piece of shit. They say that, you got to get these guys going. They all they do is stand around, this and that. And then it just goes right down to the carrier, because of course they're not gonna make their boss upset.
Yeah.
They'd rather make us upset. So they don't want to lose their job either. And it becomes like when an animal gets backed up into a corner. Of course it's gonna be you, not them.
Yeah. Well, this question's a little bit, I don't know how you can answer this one, but do the best you can. How often do carriers even realize their rights are being violated?
It it's very underreported. I think that a lot of carriers. I'm going to link this to what I've said before, and I don't know if it was on your podcast, but some people might recognize this. But I think there's a formula for apathy, and I think, and especially in my last union, I had when your wages go down, you get more and more apathetic workers who don't, instead of going to the union meetings, they're too busy trying to either distract themselves from not having enough money, like maybe play video games or something silly, or get a second job. Like, oh, well, how am I going to pay my electric bill? They're not invested anymore because their value goes down. And I think that leads to the carriers not being educated because they don't want to spend the time to educate themselves like they used to have back in the day. Now, don't get me wrong, carriers weren't educated back in the day, but they were willing to invest themselves into their job beyond the 8 hours a day, or if you're forced, 12 hours a day. At this point, we don't make enough money in terms of the value of our dollar for people to be really invested. And that's where you start falling apart as a union because carriers stop being educated, carriers stop wanting to do actions, carriers stop making the meetings, and then you just become weaker and weaker over time. So I think education is going to be something that would have to change a carrier's ability to identify violations, and then secondly, stand up for themselves and report violations.
Yeah. What pressure are carriers under today that didn't exist or weren't that this intense years ago?
Well, of course, I think the scrutiny of technology, like the scrutiny of the carrier's daily performance through technology, such as cameras, GPS data, all of that above. Because back in the day, I've heard plenty of stories where they told me that they would do things like go bowling or do whatever they want because they can get their route done in 4 hours sometimes, and then the rest of the day would be theirs, and then nobody would be held accountable for that. You can't do anything close to that today. Um, we're watched at every second of time that we do, and of course, we got the defense of GPS data. You have to actually see it, but they're still going to make choices based on what they're seeing with GPS data because we got to all admit it is technically sort of accurate sometimes, although we don't know about the time in particular where you could be disciplined for. But in general, we do know that it paints a good picture for them to be able to scrutinize your daily work performance.
How has mandatory overtime, staffing shortages, and route adjustments affected the morale?
What kind of overtime? Mandatory, you said?
Yeah.
Of course, mandatory overtime has always been a completely demoralizing issue. You want to get home, you want to see your family. I think, obviously all those things have played a very negative toll on a carrier's daily morale, and it creates more of an issue with the apathy because it makes them feel like, the grievance procedure itself doesn't provide instant results. Sorry for my phone notifications.
That's
The
okay.
grievance procedure itself doesn't provide instant results, so it makes people feel like there's really no way to truly address it in a way that they would prefer, that would be more instant in terms of protecting themselves. So it really strikes our morale in a way that's unfortunate.
From your experience, do you feel management respects the contract or just works around it?
I think it depends on the supervisor because in all reality, um, there are good ones. There's good ones and there's bad ones. And the biggest difference between yesterday and today is the postmaster. And they're not upholding the contract because no longer is the postmaster a postmaster. Lately, they've been uh, not doing anything. They carry out the district manager or the PUM's orders, and if they don't follow what they're told, get them off the clock by 6, do this or that. They don't make any individual choices on their own anymore. So even if they wanted to adhere to the contract, they can't. And at the end of the day, they either lose or they lose because if they don't follow the contract, they're going to have to be up violation, and the grievance is going to make the district manager upset. Like, why are you always paying out all this money? Well, they're following the district manager's orders is why they're paying out all the money, but they're not going to want to hear that answer. So if they directly disobey those orders, again, they lose again. So I think that there's particular instructions from above that makes it so that today noncompliance is especially impactful, especially with the weakness of the NALC in terms of escalating remedies. They see a weak spot, they smell the blood in the water, and they're taking the opportunity to strike right now.
Yeah. What tactics do you see management using that intimidate or discourage carriers from speaking up?
From speaking up, I don't know. Sometimes they'll put you on EP. I think as it relates to this issue, I think there's a more, at least I can speak for my office, there's a more relevant uh, way to frame this issue. Speaking up on one hand, I don't think that, they could punish them, they can write them up, they can pick on them, but that's not anything that's new. But one thing I've noticed is they've been trying to discourage union activity, and by it's pretty much the same concept, but it's a little bit stronger because what they'll do is, oh, you know what? You gotta be out there till 12 hours, even though you don't want to, because the union will file a grievance,
Right.
or they'll get them to start thinking the wrong way. Like right now, they're thinking, okay, the union is filing a grievance for my behalf, and they're trying to turn them on us. Sometimes I feel like that happens a lot lately,
I,
but
I I feel that management, the one thing that management's always been successful is divide and conquer.
yep,
They
absolutely.
always been divide and conquer because they always throw the union success in the grievance process to their advantage. And they say, well, the union told us we have to do this, and the way they put it, the way they do it, it's really, it's really, it's really disheartening to see how they take advantage of that,
Yeah,
you
and it's
know?
behind closed doors, so it's hard to prove sometimes.
Yeah, it's very
Depend.
hard to prove.
Yeah,
And you're never going to get statements from anyone saying that they said that.
exactly.
All right. Why do you think discipline is so often used as first tool instead of coaching?
Well, I think it's because all the supervisors in all reality are loaded up lately. They're loaded up with so much things to do. In all reality, if I know everyone makes the comment that they need less supervisors, I agree. But if they want to do things the way they're expecting them to do, they need more. And they don't care. They're just saying, hey, you got to do this, that. And then if one thing doesn't get done, then the supervisor's in trouble. Everything, every day. And like you got to do 3 observations. You got to do this, all this dumb shit. And then you also got to do all the stuff that's in the office. So how you going to do observations at the same time? So what they do is, they push for a discipline even. They take the easy way out. It takes 15 minutes to do a review, and it takes 2 minutes to just write them up. So I think that they take the easy way out. It takes less time just to issue discipline than actually fix a problem. And I think that's part of the reason why they go straight to discipline, especially because if it goes to arbitration, you got a 50-50 chance anyway.
Yeah. Throwing shit against the wall, see what sticks.
Yep.
How does fear on the workroom floor impact safety, attendance, and carrier health?
Of course, there's mental health, and you did a very fine episode on this a while back. I think mental health awareness is something that we need to start talking about, but I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't, play too much of an effect on it. But of course, I've had carriers that were afraid to come into work because, they had anxiety or this or that. And of course, fear is not something that anybody would want to have on a daily basis. So it's going to affect you in the long run.
What happens when carriers stop filing grievances because they feel nothing changes?
Well, nothing's going to change if you don't do anything, you know?
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's a terrible thing. But to be honest, I don't have that issue in my station because uh, the vast majority of the grievances I file, crash action or not, are caught by me or my other stewards, and we don't care about whether a carrier wants to file or whether they do or don't. Sometimes you need their input if you need to prove something, but if it's already proved in the clock rings or something else, I catch it every time. Some people call that fishing. It's not fishing if you know there's an issue. Like for example, if you know there's a Article 8s all the time, like it was in 23, then I'm going to ask for daily clock rings every day because it's happening. They
right,
just filed 5 times last week, so it's not fishing if you know there's issues.
right.
So
It's
It all
investigating.
depends.
It's not
Yeah,
fishing.
exactly. You're allowed to investigate the extent of the issue.
Have you personally faced pushback or retaliation for enforcing the contract?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, uh, at my last job especially, but at this one for sure. Even lately, I was written up twice last year. One time it was just ridiculous because, we had a new supervisor. She was generally pretty honest, but it just was crazy because she accused me of yelling at her on the workroom floor, and it was the dumbest lie ever because she said that I did it in the AM when everyone was there. So it was very easy to disprove. I just went, I interviewed every single person that was there that day, and not a single one said they heard me. So if I was right next to everybody else, especially the guys that are the cases next to me, at the time my case was right next to management's desk, and she said that I violated the joint statement, and I yelled at her in front of everybody on the workroom floor. Not a single person saw it or heard it, and not even the guys that don't like me. Not everyone's going to like everybody, but yeah, they said no. It was easy, and it's like, why do you play these games? It was clearly because I was a thorn in their side, and they wanted to be one right back to me. And they've done that plenty of times since I got here. They issue discipline and then make you jump through the hoops, and if you don't, then they win, and if you do, then they win because you had to jump through the hoops to get it removed.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think the union is doing well right now?
Depending on the region, I think sometimes training is good, but I think we're failing in a lot of areas, and we're a good union compared to my last or many other ones. So I think that it's hard you have to have the perspective of who the NALC was compared to who they are today, because some unions would say we're doing a great job right now, but based on who we were back in the day, I think we've taken dramatic steps back. I think we need the return of someone like Sobrato because we're failing in many different ways. And for some reason, sometimes they don't even understand they're failing. Like when they do this non-compliance shit, when they say, "Hey, we're hurting the service." Well, how do you suppose we hold them accountable? It's not our fault that they violate. And I think they really truly think that they're doing something good here, and just like Rademacher did. And it's time to let them know again. We steer this ship.
Yeah. And I guess this question's already answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Where do you think the union is falling short for rank and file carriers?
It's everywhere, but it's easier to list the things that they're doing well than they are doing poorly because, like I said before, with the context of who we were, I don't think we're doing anything better than we used to.
Well, Josh, this is not in a questionnaire. I'm just bringing this up.
Yeah,
Do you think the downfall of all these major issues that we're facing today has to do with the DOS award, the
I think
CCA program?
I think that it's very related to part of their plans that are speculative. Like for example, um, the undermining of the career we have here. With the DOS road came more temporary workers who weren't very invested. They weren't as trained, and they are rotating door. Unlike before, when it was more of a career pathway where you got professional carriers who were all professional, but you know what I mean. We had to jump through more hoops to get hired. I wasn't part of them people, but you had a professional set of people. The public saw that we were very professional. When you got a rotating door of people who just come in, they don't treat it like a career, they leave because we're not treating them like careers. Well, then of course the public's going to start their opinions just start going down because we don't got a guy that's been here 30 years delivering your mail anymore. We got a guy who's been here a year, and just like the last one who's been here a year, and they were chased out and forced to do all these things that they're not supposed to be doing. And I think it has a lot to do with the DOS award, but I don't think it's the downfall. I think the main issue with the DOS award is the fact that Brian Renfro was involved and people of his nature. I think we just don't have the right leaders. He was around during that time. He wasn't the president, but he was
He
around. He
was
was
the
part of
executive
the
vice president at the time.
exactly. So
Yeah.
people like Ryan, who they have possibly the right intent, but they just don't know how to implement it the right way. They're just steering us in the wrong direction, and they don't even know it.
And that brings up the point I was about to make. The NERP program, the NERP, if I'm saying it right, the NERP program
Yep.
that we was implemented in this new contract, that's just putting a Band-Aid on the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That's
think
just
that.
putting a Band-Aid. I mean, if
eh,
they're not following the
Yeah.
contract now, what makes you believe they're going to follow that policy?
Well, I think that it's good and bad. Like, of course, you're right. It's a temporary solution, but I think that I'm a little bit biased about the way it stands today because I was part of the pilot program. It was worse back then than it is now. Because at least back then it was part of an ADR resolution process. You couldn't file a grievance, so
Right.
it was unenforceable. But now it's enforceable by the contract. I like that, but I think that it creates a little bit of division sometimes because in the past we were so, your seniority, everything has to do with who gets mandated and this and that. Maybe not by seniority, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
essentially, the guys at the bottom, they get it the worst. And now, technically today with the NERP program, you can be real divisive because a guy who just got here can get 8-hour days, and then you're sitting there an 8-hour carrier, and you got to get mandated.
And the only issue I have with that is that they don't see the reality of the job.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
when they do put in their time and they get the reality of the job, they're already invested in a year from now, and now they throw everything
Yep.
on them when they should
Yeah.
have thrown everything on them when they were younger.
Exactly. It's the opposite of what you need to be doing because you're teaching them that this job is easier than it is. And then once those restrictions get removed, now it's not easing them in. Now they're used to an 8-hour day and they're gonna or 10-hour day or whatever the restriction was. Now they're mandated every day. Now they're pissed. They don't know the job was this bad until you got them there past their 90 days now. So you're gonna have to keep them. So that's good. But
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's like we're investing money to throw it away. Um, do you feel carriers' voices are truly being heard at the national level?
no, I think a lot of times ego plays a big factor. This is normal for unions. So my last branch president, essentially, I questioned what he was doing. I tried to run against him, and he got me fired. And I think that's just the same type of people we're dealing with here. And I had a branch president. He was at a branch of 17,000 members. We call it a local, not a branch, but that he had a lot of money and a lot of power. And when you get that, you get kind of an ego. You think you know what's best for the membership, and a lot of times, no matter what they say, they're not right. And I feel like that's the type of leadership we're dealing with lately. Depending on who it is,
Yeah.
they're not going to hear anything we got to say as long as it doesn't fit their narrative.
Why do so many carriers feel disconnected or discouraged from the union involvement?
I think it has a lot to do with two of the things I said earlier: the apathy. They don't have a lot of value to their dollars, so uh, they're developing a preference not to be involved because they're too busy with other things like trying to make money outside of this job or trying to distract themselves from how bad they got it because they're so close to their bills. They can't really, they're not going to be happy to be participatory, but also has to do with the grievance procedure. We don't get very instant results. So they file, they hear that they're filing, maybe the steward's filing, but they hear over and over again, oh, I'll fix this issue, I'll fix this issue. It doesn't get fixed because our grievance procedure makes it so that we have to be overwhelming to achieve an escalated remedy. And then an escalated remedy is the only way to stop them. So like for someone to say, okay, well, this issue is going on, can you file a grievance? A year down the line, now we finally got enough for a $25 escalation, but 25 is not going to make them stop. Another year down the line, now we got enough for 50, and then 100, and then eventually you get there. And that's the problem is it's it's very discouraging that an issue can go 5 years long and still like, especially work. We need an expedited issue. We need an expedited process with work conditions because I got an installation in my branch that's very pissed right now, and they feel the same way, discouraged because we have a no lunch policy, and Of course, they took it away wrongfully without negotiating or anything else. We filed a grievance, but now they got to take a lunch every day, which, I personally, I prefer to take a lunch, but I'm not them, and I'm not even from the station. They do their own thing, and they're upset because they're taking away a work policy that used to be in place for 30 years, and it takes over a year to get it resolved. And by then, now they're going to be used to the new way. They have the right to keep their old policies,
Yeah,
the past practice. But it's
yeah,
very discouraging when you got to wait a year and a half to get it corrected.
yeah. Well, I have to agree with you on that one. What would you say to carriers who feel like the union doesn't fight for me anymore?
I'd say that unfortunately you got to be your own change. And there's not always going to be the room to have everyone be a captain, but you got to be one anyway. And you may not make it as far as you want to make it in terms of maybe you won't be a steward, but you can be the best alternative to being a steward. You can look at all the information you can report it to your stewards or vice versa. Maybe you're a steward, maybe you'll never be a branch officer, but you can do as best as you can in each individual role, and that's the only way anything's going to change. I know it's easy for us to be discouraged and feel apathetic, but with apathy, you never get anything to change. And what Martin Luther King said, I think he said, "There's no progress without struggle." Well, it's time for us to start struggling, and we'll make some progress in the long run.
I agree with that. I agree with that. How important is transparency in a union leadership?
Well, it all depends on the membership because I think it's required, but transparency is something that should be demanded from the membership. If you set that expectation with again, the top right now, they think they run the boat, but really it's the membership who gets to make that decision. So if they're expecting transparency, they're making motions, getting it to the point where it becomes a rule. Well, they have no other choice but to follow the will of the membership. So I think it all depends on where the membership's will is, and I think a lot of us value transparency.
Yeah. Do you think leadership should be more accountable to the membership? And if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we should redo the Article 10 process because it shouldn't be subject to bias opinion of the executive board. I think that uh, more likely than not, it should be something we vote on as a major body, maybe even through uh, the channels of mail-in ballots, even, which I'm back and forth about whether or not I like that. But either way, it should be subject to the membership. I think that our leadership should be absolutely held accountable, but that's just me. A lot of carriers feel a little bit softer to management, but to not management to
Yeah,
union officers, but sometimes they act like management, and that's where we got to put our foot down. And I don't like that.
what role do stewards play in rebuilding the trust between carriers and the union?
Well, stewards are absolutely a pinnacle of ensuring that trust is something that a carrier has in the union because most of what they do is firsthand experience by each and every carrier. And I think that they should follow the five tenets of being a steward. And man, I really hope I remember what the five tenets are off the top of my head. But there's the number one, first and foremost. I think it's number four on my list. I didn't create it, but I definitely tell all my stewards, look, you got to follow all five of these. But number one in my book is creating, making sure you don't create even the appearance of self-serving behavior. But then there's consistent enforcement of the contract. You got to make sure that uh, the first one, you got to make sure you're not paying yourself first. Make sure that they understand that you're doing things in a fair and roundabout way. Second one, you got to make sure that you're enforcing the contract each and every time. It doesn't matter whether the violation you feel hurts somebody. It's a violation, needs to be addressed. There's wearing the union brand, making sure that you encourage union activity, doing all that fun stuff. You got to be honest and make sure that you're never dishonest because once you're dishonest, you're going to lose all trust. And you just got to make sure you're doing your job. Anytime someone comes up to you just do it in a way that supports the membership so that they do trust you. Like, for example, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me with this because we have the right to choose to file something. We also have the right to choose how we resolve it, regardless of the opinion of the member. But I disagree with that stance because if you let the member, if you put that ball in the member's court sometimes or almost every time, you're never going to have an issue because they made the choice themselves. Like, for example, with discipline, I tell all my stewards, look, if you got a discipline case, always bring it back to the member. Say, look, here's my chances. Here's what I found that was wrong. What I found that was right. I think we got a good chance to win it at step B, or I think I got a bad chance to win it at step B. This is what management offered me. What do you want to do? How do you want to proceed? Do you want to take the chance, send it to step B, and maybe you get 2 years still, or still get a removal, or whatever the case may be? Or do you want to settle for what they offered us? If you put it in the members' hands, you can never go wrong. I know we don't have to, but you can never go wrong if you do. So what's the problem with that?
Yeah, I have this saying that in my branch that I always say, show me your workroom floor and I can show you what type of shop steward you have. And I think that's an unfair, but it's realistic. It's reality. The shop steward
Yeah.
sets the tone on our workroom floor. I'm a firm believer because when I was a shop steward, before I became a branch officer, before I became formal A rep, I knew what was going on in all four corners of my station. I
Yep.
knew it. And I knew what was going on, and nothing got through me. So it's up to the shop steward to police that workroom floor. You
Yeah,
know
absolutely.
the personalities. They know the players better than anyone. They even know the supervisors. I don't know all the supervisors. I mean, I know their names, but I don't know their
Yeah,
demeanor. I don't know their attitude. You know.
absolutely.
Do you think USPS leadership understands the realities of delivery work?
Of course not. Yeah. I mean, they think that we're just standing out there doing nothing. So they think that yeah, every 2 minutes is a stationary minute time. Every time we ping it, it must mean we're not working. Of course not. They just get fed all this information. And I've seen supervisors who work carriers who go in with a realistic mindset, but they just get brainwashed with all this information like, oh, the postal service is going to lose one day. We're going to be transformed into something and blah, blah, blah. We got to do what we can to essentially steal from carriers and do whatever it takes to, they don't say it that way, but they get indoctrinated and they only see that vision of this is what they told me, this is what's true. And
Yeah.
they're coming from the people who never seen the workroom floor. So
Yeah, it's very discouraging. It really is. It feels like they want to see it fail.
I think they do.
They really do want it to fail. Um, how do top-down decisions impact carriers on the street?
Of course, we were gone over this. They'd never seen the workroom floor before. So
Yeah,
gu- guys at the top are telling it, sorry, guys at the top are telling everybody exactly what to do, but they don't understand the complete impact of their choices or anything like that.
well, here's a deep question, Josh. What do you think the future of the Postal Service looks like if things don't change?
Okay, so my outlook is a little bit different than a lot of other people's. A lot of people think we need to transform into something that we're not. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, volume's down. Realistically, we gotta take another approach and do this package bullshit." And I think that's a very defeatist attitude. I think that those guys they're bringing their own destruction upon themselves. I think what we got to do, and I think what's going to happen, unfortunately, it's a bad scenario either way, but I prefer it my way. I don't want it to transform into something that's like, for example, parcel runners versus mail runners, and like one guy cases 5 routes, and that's the future. A lot of people are saying is going to happen. I say hell no, not until they
Yeah,
push it on us. I think it's more likely if they want to save money. I think it's more likely we're going to be swept into the government's wing again. As shitty as that sounds, I don't want it to happen, but I prefer it than the other way around. I think what's ultimately going to happen is at some point the American public's going to have to make a choice. They're going to say, do we want the service the way it's provided today? Do we think it's valuable enough to start paying them taxpayer money, because one day we're going to need to be bailed out again. So that's going to cost taxpayer money. So do we want it to stand the way it does today? 5, 6 day delivery, packages on Sunday. Is that valuable to me as an American public, or am I wanting to see it transform? And whether what direction they take, what direction everyone takes, is how it's going to impact us. I think that the politicians themselves, unless they change their opinion on the ads that they send by mail, I think they feel that they make a huge impact and they already get a good discount. I think they're going to see this as an opportunity. I think they're going to say, okay, well, how about we sweep them back into the government and give us a discount? Like maybe political mail is now free for them to send.
Well,
I think
political mail is pretty much free
it
now.
pretty
I
much
mean,
is. But what I mean by that is they see value in our work. They're going to try and utilize that to say they deserve to be in complete control of what we do. Let's put them back into the government and run them on a nonprofit model, like where we're not forced to make profit, but we do the best we can. Because I think they see potential in having us as someone that they can tell what to do or how to provide services.
all right. Well, that was a good answer, brother. Who ultimately pays the price when carriers are overworked and underprotected?
Well, of course, the carrier does, and the customer too. But the carriers get the brunt of it because, of course, they stuff like Eugene Gates happens. That they die, they pay the ultimate price. But of course, the customer's not making out well either, because their product is, the things that they expect, the things like checks and whatever else, not coming to the door either, because the carrier died in the lawn. So anything can happen to that mail. It got stolen. Carrier pays the price by, of course, nobody wants to get a theft. No one wants to go against a thief. I'm sure that encounter sucked. In fact, they could have gotten injured from it. But then the customer also pays because they stole their checks. So everyone pays.
Yeah. When did you first learn about the concerned letter carriers, CLC?
Well, I've always been a listener of Corey Walton, and uh, I think just like everyone else, we first heard about it through Corey's podcast. So, I always thought it was a great idea. It's a group that I completely endorse for the most part.
What about the CLC stood out? What is about the CLC stood out to you compared to traditional union leadership?
Well, I think that the CLC puts the letter carrier first for the most part, and that's the whole slogan, concerned letter carrier. It's about being addressing the concerns of the letter carrier. It's not about showboating or trying to make a name for yourself or moving up. It's not a group that is ran from the top down. It seems majority of the time, most of their choices are from the bottom up, and they react. They're a reactionary group. If something needs to be addressed, they change their stance to address it. Perfect example is your podcast with Bill Kriebel and Walt McGregory. You guys are on the CLC slate. I'm not sure which position, if you have any, but either way, you guys are all CLC endorsed. And winter comes around, you talk about winter health. I assume. I can't remember. I think you did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I heard
Yeah.
it by a few people, so I couldn't remember if it was just Corey, if it was you guys, or what. But Corey's part of the CLC too. So things change, you guys react to it. Something changes, you guys react to it. The new interpretive step happens, you guys put out information about that interpretive step, how it would impact carriers, and how you guys have the particular opinion. So I think that's good. And that's not something we observe in a lot of the leadership we have today, outside of people who are currently in positions. But people like, they're not so transparent as the CLC for the most part.
How does the CLC empower carriers who feel ignored or silenced?
Well, it's exactly what I said earlier. It's CLC, concerned letter carrier. So we take their concerns, not we as in me, but I'm not part of the CLC, but you guys take their concerns and you make it at the forefront of what you do, is what I imagine. It seems like you guys do that. for the most part. Everything I've witnessed that comes out of you guys seems seem to show that you guys mean what you're saying. Uh you guys say one thing and you end up following through on it. So it's not like you guys are just saying it.
What advice would you give a carrier who's afraid to stand up for themselves?
Well, I'd say that the first step in standing up for yourself has to do with whether or not you're educated about what your rights are and what what is the consequence of standing up for yourself. Because you may have a different understanding of what the consequence is. You could think that it's more serious. Maybe you think you're going to lose your job. I'd say educate yourself first and get yourself in contact with a network of people who you trust and you can talk to. And I think that at the end of the day, if you can't stand for yourself, put your faith in your steward or someone else in that network that you are talking to. They do this all the time. I've done it myself personally, but because every decision I make, I go through a network. Like, for example, when I want to send something to Step B, we can't talk to our Step B representatives. So what I do is I call a number of Step B representatives that I have on my network of people I talk to who I trust. And I say, hey, I got this case. I don't know how it's going to work out. Let me know what you think you would do if you were my Step B based on this information I'm about to present to you. Or how do you think you could change this? Uh, what do you think I should approach my Step B with if I want to make this change or if I want to request this particular thing? So you got to create yourself a network within the people you know. You can go on Discord, you can go on Reddit, you can go on Facebook. Find yourself like-minded people and create yourself a network, especially in your local area. And if you can't do it yourself, then try and ask your branch or people from that network what they would do in your shoes. And that would hopefully empower you enough to make the right choice.
What does solidarity actually looks like in action?
Well, I guess that what I just said was a good example, but
Yeah,
in
I think so.
general, it's about as basic of a concept as you could be. And one of the tenets of a good member and a good steward is to bear witness. Bearing witness is very important. And that's a perfect example is if you see something, make sure, first of all, have your eyes open. Make sure you articulate everything that's going around you so that when something occurs and you need a statement, then someone else needs a statement, you can help your fellow worker. Come to work with witness every day and bear witness when it's needed. And that's an example of solidarity because just do everything you can. It doesn't take much to put your head up and listen sometimes or to write a statement, but it means the world when it comes to filing a grievance. So do whatever you can within your own capacity to help your brothers and sisters. And that's what solidarity looks like.
Here comes a fun question. If you could say one thing directly to USPS leadership, what would it be?
Well, I tell them that that's a good question. I tell them that the time of us being weak is coming to an end, and I think they already know that. The CLC or whoever's equivalent, we're not going to have Brian Renfro forever. There's a lot of carriers starting to stand up for themselves a lot more. You can see that in the backlog. I think part of the reason why we got a backlog is people are getting more educated, and then that follows with more grievances. And I think that with more people standing up for themselves, we're not going to have weak leadership sooner or later. So I think the time for them to benefit off of us is coming to an end, and I think they know that. And I'd like to let them make sure they know that it's sooner than later.
And finally, what keeps you fighting even when it gets hard?
I'm a little bit different than most people. I invest more of my time than I need to into these types of things. I do it for the love of it. So for me, like filing agreements is fun. I often do it in my own, like every day I get to work at 4 a.m., between 4 and 6, but on a good day, 4 a.m. And I just file grievances for fun because it's fun for me. So for me, it's a little bit different. I don't know if anybody else can relate to the things that I do, but you know, uh, I, I just do it for the fun of it. So it's hard for me to ever stop, to be honest. I don't
Any
have a good
closing
answer for you.
any closing thoughts? Any closing thoughts? Anything we did not touch on that you would like to bring up?
Yeah, I mean, I got a few things, but how's your podcast been?
It's been good, man. It's been good. I enjoy it. I got a whole lineup of CLC candidates lined up for interviews.
Nice.
I'm hitting on some topics. I think some hot topics that I'm passionate about. You know,
Of course.
I recorded a episode just before this one, carrier versus carrier.
Okay.
And I'm holding, you know, the issue with the carrier versus carrier is that the carrier versus carrier feels like the union should be the one policing that. And it's still
Yeah.
on management to keep a workroom floor safe and respectful. And I did an episode with that. That'll be published after this episode. So I don't know if I touched on it very well, but my podcast is doing good. I know your podcast is is going crazy.
Yeah,
You're
it's not
doing a
too
good
bad.
job.
Not too bad. I did experience my first negative month. Like every month it was growing until January for some reason. And
Well, I
yeah,
hate to say this, but I don't think that has to do with the people not listening. I think it has to do
yeah,
with the fact that no one's listening in 15 below zero.
exactly.
You know
And
what I
and
mean?
some people were
Because
without power.
I have noticed that my listeners dropped too the last couple of weeks, dropped dramatically. But yesterday it kind of rised a little bit because it was nicer weather. I think
Yeah.
once the weather gets nicer, you'll start hearing people
Either way
listening.
works. I'm just there for them to listen. If they don't want to, that's fine. But also, what kind of coffee you like? Maxwell House?
I'm a Maxwell House guy, but I love 7-Eleven. I
Yeah.
enjoy 7-Eleven.
I meant to bring for everyone listening, I meant to bring my coffee today. I got my C4 energy drink instead.
Well, for everybody that's listening, I got my cup of coffee right now.
Yeah. Normally I like chock full of nuts, and my coffee machine wasn't ready to be used this morning, but I like chock full of nuts, and I like there's this Louisiana brand. I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's some kind of French word, but that one's really good too. Man, Louisiana food's so good.
Yeah.
Don't matter whether it's coffee or Cajun food or what, but something about Louisiana I just like. But other than that, yeah, I'll just let the people know. My podcast is Parcels of Knowledge. It's found on most platforms, Spotify, Apple Mute Podcast, and I got Podbean and whatever else. I got YouTube. That's where this video is. My first video going to be on YouTube is going to be this one. Thanks to Richie Ray. I loved being on this podcast, and he's been an inspiration to me. He started before me. He's still a great guy, great podcast. So make sure you invest in Richie Ray. And I got a giveaway. I'm trying to give away some reference cards. So if you check into that, you can get some free steward material. Branch 828 makes it, but they're not endorsing me or anything. They just make good materials. That's where everyone gets their calendars. Um, Other than that, I got a website. Philip DeGilio is put together a website. I haven't even announced yet. He's doing a good job. Yeah, he's doing a really good job. He's one of my Patreon members. And other than that, I think I've said everything I got to say.
All right, Josh. Listen, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time. It's a Sunday. I appreciate you, brother. And my brothers and sisters out there, please be safe. Remember, Hot House loves you. Hot House is me, Richie Ray. Peace out.